There is an island off the coast of Western Australia where the Australian government detonated a nuclear bomb inside a ship, and you can still visit the crater it left on the seabed. Underneath the outback, a radar network nobody talks about watches everything that moves for 3,000 kilometers in every direction. One island has not had a single foreign species set foot on it in over a century, and the quarantine system keeping it that way cost more than some countries' entire military budgets. These are 20 places in Australia the government does not want you to see. Number 20. Dory Island. Dory Island sits in the Shark Bay World Heritage Area, about 60 kilometers off the coast of Western Australia. It is uninhabited. No jetty, no buildings, no trails. Landing on the island is completely prohibited. The reason is a virus. Dory Island is one of only 2 islands in the world that remain free of a fatal papilloma wart virus that devastates western barred bandicoots. These tiny marsupials once roamed much of southern Australia. Foxes and cats wiped them off the mainland. Dory became their last natural stronghold. The Western Australian government declared the island a wildlife protection quarantine zone, and the quarantine is absolute. No boots touch the sand. No boats tie up on shore. The logic is brutally simple. If the virus reaches Dory, the bandicoots have nowhere left to go. Satellite imagery shows a pristine island with turquoise shallows and white sand beaches that look like a travel poster. What it cannot show you is why nobody will ever set foot there. The species' survival depends on the island staying empty. Number 19. Cartier Island. Cartier Island is a sand cay roughly 600 kilometers north of Broome, closer to Indonesia than to any Australian city. It sits inside a 172 square kilometer marine reserve, and entering the sanctuary zone is strictly forbidden. The waters are home to sea snakes, whale sharks, turtles, coral formations, and some of the most intact reef ecosystems left in Australian waters. But the ban is not just about ecology. Until 2011, Cartier Island and a 10-kilometer radius around it was used as a defense practice area. The Australian military dropped ordnance on and around this speck of sand for decades. Unexploded weapons remain scattered across the reef and seabed. Nobody knows exactly how many. No systematic clearance has ever been conducted, so the government sealed the whole area. It is simultaneously one of the most biodiverse marine zones in Australia and one of the most dangerous. Anchoring within the sanctuary zone can result in prosecution. Getting close enough to fish risks detonating something that was meant to sink a ship. Cartier Island is protected by its beauty and its bombs. Number 18. Albatross Island. Albatross Island is an 18-hectare speck of granite in western Bass Strait, roughly 35 kilometers off the northwest tip of Tasmania. No public access is permitted, not seasonally, not by application, not at all. Only 5 people are allowed on the island at any one time, and only during authorized scientific monitoring trips. The reason is a bird. The shy albatross breeds on just 3 islands on Earth. All 3 are off Tasmania. Albatross Island holds around 5,200 breeding pairs, approximately 40% of the entire global population of the species. In the 1800s, sealers and feather hunters nearly wiped the colony out, reducing it to as few as 200 birds. The recovery took over a century. Today, the shy albatross is listed as endangered. Researchers camp in a cave system that runs the length of the island. They bring all water and supplies in and take everything out again. Climate change is warming the air during chick rearing season, lowering survival rates. Scientists have begun airlifting artificial nests made of mud brick and aerated concrete onto the island to give chicks a better chance. The shy albatross has a wingspan of over 2 meters and can live for 40 years. Keeping humans off its island is the simplest thing Australia can do to make sure it survives. Number 17. Karnak Island. Karnak Island is a 19-hectare limestone outcrop about 10 kilometers southwest of Fremantle, Western Australia. You can see it from the mainland on a clear day. You cannot step off the beach. The interior is completely off limits because it is home to roughly 400 tiger snakes, one of the deadliest species on the planet. The density is staggering. Around 20 adult snakes per hectare. They are 20 to 30% larger than mainland tiger snakes, with bigger jaws evolved to swallow whole seagull chicks. And 5% of them are blind, their eyes pecked out by silver gulls defending their nests. The blind snakes survive by scent alone. David Attenborough filmed them in 2006. Nobody else has documented this behavior anywhere on Earth. The snakes likely arrived in the 1930s. One theory points to a man named Lindsay Rocky Vane, a snake showman whose wife and assistant were both killed by snakebite. When exhibitions were banned in Western Australia, he reportedly dumped his collection on the island. Visitors can snorkel the surrounding waters and watch Australian sea lions from the beach. But venture past the sand and you enter one of the most venomous square kilometers in Australia. Number 16. Barrow Island. Barrow Island sits 50 kilometers off the Pilbara coast of Western Australia. It has been a Class A nature reserve since 1910 and is also home to Australia's largest onshore oil field and the $54 billion Gorgon gas project. Public access is banned. Every person and every piece of cargo that reaches the island passes through the largest non-government quarantine system in the world. During the Gorgon project's construction phase, more than 500,000 passengers and 12.2 million tons of freight were transported to the island. Each delivery required inspection. In total, 1.5 million hours of biosecurity checks were conducted over 6 years. The reason is simple. Barrow Island has never had a fox, a cat, a rabbit, or a rat establish itself there. It is one of the largest landmasses on Earth, with no established non-indigenous vertebrate species. 13 mammal species live on the island, including the spectacled hair wallaby and the golden bandicoot, both extinct or critically endangered on the mainland. Beneath the limestone, cave systems harbor blind cave eels and blind gudgeons found nowhere else. The 3,000 fly-in fly-out workers on the island cannot bring pets, plants, or personal food items. Fishing is banned. Workers who spot a foreign seed or cockroach are publicly rewarded. The irony is hard to miss. One of Australia's most pristine ecosystems sits directly on top of one of its most valuable resource deposits. Number 15. Arnhem Land. Arnhem Land covers roughly 97,000 square kilometers in the far northeast corner of the Northern Territory. That is bigger than Hungary. Around 16,000 people live there, the vast majority Yolngu Aboriginal people. For non-Indigenous Australians, entering without a permit is illegal. Entering without a permit can result in fines exceeding $11,000 under Commonwealth law. The permit system exists under the Aboriginal Land Rights Act of 1976, which granted inalienable freehold title to the traditional owners. Arnhem Land is not Crown land, it is private Aboriginal land owned collectively, and the permit system functions the same way a locked gate does on any private property. The difference is the scale. Inside this area you will find some of the oldest rock art galleries on Earth, with paintings dating back over 50,000 years. The coastline is rugged and wild. The rivers flood seasonally, cutting off communities for months. Most roads are unsealed and impassable during the wet season. The annual Garma Festival near Nulunbai is one of Australia's most significant cultural events, but even attending requires a permit. Arnhem Land is not restricted because the government is hiding something. It is restricted because the people who own it have the legal right to say who enters. If you're enjoying the video so far, then make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Number 14. Jindalee Operational Radar Network. The word Jindalee comes from an Aboriginal language and means a place the eye cannot see. The name is fitting. Scattered across 3 remote locations in Queensland, the Northern Territory, and Western Australia are transmitter arrays that most Australians have never heard of. Together, they form JORN, the Jindalee Operational Radar Network. JORN bounces high-frequency radio waves off the ionosphere to detect aircraft and ships up to 3,000 kilometers away. That is well beyond the curve of the Earth. Conventional radar cannot do this. JORN watches a surveillance footprint of over 37,000 square kilometers across Australia's northern and western approaches. The transmitter sites are fenced, guarded, and classified. You cannot drive near them without encountering warning signs. The system has been in development since experiments in the 1950s and reached full operational status in the early 2000s. It cost approximately $1.8 billion to build. In June 2026, Australia signed a $2.5 billion deal to sell the technology to Canada for Arctic surveillance, making it Australia's largest ever defense export. Few Australians know JORN exists. Fewer still know that it quietly watches everything that moves between Australia and Southeast Asia every hour of every day. Number 13. Emu Field. Emu Field is a flat clay pen in the Great Victoria Desert of South Australia, roughly 400 kilometers northwest of Woomera. On 15 October 1953, the British government detonated a 9-kiloton nuclear bomb on a steel tower at this site. 12 days later, they detonated a second. The tests were called Operation Totem. What happened next was never supposed to occur. The radioactive cloud from the first detonation did not disperse as predicted. Instead, it rolled northeast across inhabited land as a thick, greasy black mist. Aboriginal communities near Wallatina and Mintibi, 170 kilometers downwind, watched it come through the mulga trees. At least 45 members of the Yankanicha Jara people reported acute radiation sickness. Vomiting, peeling skin, blindness. More than half died soon after. RAAF aircrew who flew into the cloud found their planes so contaminated that a Geiger counter spiked off the scale. Emu Field sits within the Woomera prohibited area and requires RAAF permission to visit. Stone obelisks mark the 2 ground zero points. They carry warnings not to linger. Radioactivity at the site remains above normal levels more than 7 decades later. The British government still classifies the innermost technical details of Operation Totem. Number 12. Montebello Islands. The Montebello Islands are an archipelago of around 174 small islands lying 130 kilometers off the Pilbara coast of Western Australia. They look untouched from the air. They are not. On 3 October 1952, the British government detonated a 25-kiloton nuclear bomb inside the hull of the frigate HMS Plym, anchored in a lagoon off Tremool Island. The explosion vaporized the ship entirely. All that remained was a propeller and a saucer-shaped crater on the seabed 6 meters deep and 300 meters across. It was the first British nuclear weapon test in history. 4 years later, Britain returned for Operation Mosaic. The second Mosaic test remains the largest nuclear explosion ever conducted on Australian soil. Some estimates put the yield at 98 kilotons, 6 times the size of the Hiroshima bomb. The 1985 Royal Commission found that the Montebello Islands were an unsafe and inappropriate location for testing, and that the Australian government had been given insufficient information about the potential effects. Today, the islands are a marine conservation reserve. Visitors are warned to spend no more than 1 hour per day at the 3 ground zero sites and to avoid handling any objects which may still be radioactive. A few thousand people visit each year, drawn by the diving and the coral. Most have no idea they are snorkeling over a nuclear test site. Number 11. Naval Communications Station Harold E. Holt. 6 kilometers north of the tiny town of Exmouth, on Western Australia's northwest cape, stands an array of 13 steel towers stretching across 400 hectares of flat, sun-blasted scrub. The central tower, Tower 0, rises 387 meters into the sky. It was once the tallest man-made structure in the Southern Hemisphere. This is Naval Communications Station Harold E. Holt. It transmits very low-frequency radio signals at 1 megawatt of power, making it the most powerful transmission station in the Southern Hemisphere. Those signals penetrate ocean water to a depth of more than 20 meters, allowing communication with submerged submarines across the Western Pacific and Indian Oceans. The station was built in 1967 as a U.S. Navy facility. The town of Exmouth was constructed specifically to house the American personnel and their families. Australia took full command in 1992. During the Cold War, the station would have been a high-priority Soviet nuclear target. Today it remains a joint Australian-American facility under a treaty renewed in 2008. The perimeter is fenced and guarded. New radar and space surveillance systems are being installed on the peninsula as part of an expanding defense presence. The station is named after Harold Holt, Australia's 17th Prime Minister, who disappeared while swimming at Cheviot Beach in 1967. His body was never found. Number 10. Heard Island. Heard Island sits in the southern Indian Ocean, roughly 4,000 kilometers southwest of Perth, and 1,700 kilometers from Antarctica. It is Australian territory. Almost nobody has been there. The island is dominated by Big Ben, an active stratovolcano whose peak, Mawson Peak, reaches 2,745 meters. It is the highest point on Australian territory outside the Australian Antarctic Territory, and the only active volcano on Australian soil. It has been erupting near continuously since 2012. The island is managed as a strict nature reserve. Access requires a government permit, and permits are only granted for approved scientific research. No tourist has ever legally visited. Getting there requires a 2-week sea voyage through some of the roughest waters on Earth. across latitudes known as the Furious 50s. Wind gusts have been recorded at 209 kilometers per hour. Average annual temperature is 1 degree Celsius. Snow falls to sea level year-round. Despite this, the island supports colonies of elephant seals, fur seals, king penguins, and macaroni penguins. It has never had a single non-native species introduced by humans. No rats, no mice, no weeds. The government's policy is to keep it that way. Heard Island is one of the last truly wild places left on Earth, and Australia intends to make sure it stays that way. Number 9. Woomera Prohibited Area. The Woomera Prohibited Area covers 2,188 square kilometers of South Australian desert. That is roughly the size of North Korea. It is the largest military testing range in the Western world. Established in 1947, it has been used for rocket launches, missile testing, drone trials, and, most infamously, British nuclear weapons tests. The Stuart Highway cuts through it, and you can drive along the road. But if you leave the highway without a permit, you are breaking the law. The area is divided into green, amber, and red access zones. No civilian access is permitted to the red zone at any time. The amber zone has exclusion periods published annually. Even the green zone can be closed with 21 days' notice. During active testing, RAF patrols enforce road closures. The airspace above the entire area is restricted and controlled. Woomera Village, built in the 1940s to support the weapons program, peaked at a population of around 7,000 in the 1960s. Today, a few hundred people live there. The village has a museum and a missile park where you can walk among decommissioned rockets and missiles. It is the only part of the prohibited area you can visit freely. Everything else requires paperwork, background checks, and the approval of the Department of Defense. Number 8. Kojarena. About 30 kilometers east of Geraldton in Western Australia sits a cluster of white radomes in dry farmland. This is the Australian Defence Satellite Communication Station at Kojarena, part of the Five Eyes intelligence alliance that links Australia, the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and New Zealand. Kojarena intercepts satellite communications across the Asia-Pacific region. It is widely believed to have been part of the E.C. Helen surveillance network, the global signals intelligence system revealed in the 1990s. The station's precise capabilities remain classified. What is known is that the facility operates multiple satellite dishes housed inside protective radomes, and that it feeds intelligence to Australian and American agencies. The perimeter is fenced with no approach zones enforced by Commonwealth law. Unlike Pine Gap, Kojarena receives relatively little public attention. It does not appear prominently in news cycles. There have been no Netflix series about it, but its role in the global surveillance architecture is significant, and its expansion in recent years suggests its importance is growing. Drive along the roads east of Geraldton and you will see the white domes rising above the wheat fields. You will not be able to get closer. Number 7. Christmas Island Detention Center. Christmas Island sits in the Indian Ocean, roughly 2,600 kilometers northwest of Perth and 350 kilometers south of Jakarta. It is closer to Indonesia than to any Australian city. The island is best known to most Australians for two things: its annual red crab migration, in which millions of crabs cross roads and bridges to reach the sea, and the Christmas Island Immigration Detention Center. The detention facility was built in 2008 at a cost of over $400 million. At its peak, it held over 2,000 asylum seekers. The center is fenced, guarded, and not accessible to the public or media without government authorization. Conditions inside have been the subject of Senate inquiries, Human Rights Commission reports, and international criticism. The broader facility sits on a plateau surrounded by dense rainforest, and its size relative to the island's total population of around 1,800 permanent residents is striking. The detention center has been opened, closed, and reopened multiple times depending on government policy. Regardless of its operational status, the site remains restricted. Christmas Island itself is open to visitors, and the national park covers roughly 63% of the island's area. But the detention center compound is a place the government prefers you not to see up close. Number 6. Lucas Heights. In the southern suburbs of Sydney, about 30 kilometers from the city centre, sits Australia's only nuclear reactor. The facility at Lucas Heights is operated by the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation. The current reactor, called OPAL, went critical in 2006. and produces medical isotopes used in hospitals across Australia and the Asia-Pacific. It is a 20-megawatt research reactor, not a power station. The surrounding area is fenced and patrolled. Permanent exclusion zones restrict residential development, and the facility operates under Commonwealth security legislation. The previous reactor at the site, HIFAR, operated from 1958 to 2007 and spent its final decades as one of the most controversial facilities in Sydney. Protests were common. Residents in surrounding suburbs like Engadine and Menai lived with the knowledge that a nuclear reactor sat behind the tree line. Opal produces around 85% of Australia's nuclear medicine supply. Without it, cancer patients across the country would lose access to diagnostic imaging and treatment. The facility also stores spent nuclear fuel on site, a fact that has generated decades of debate about where Australia's nuclear waste should ultimately go. Lucas Heights is the rare case where a facility most Australians would rather not think about is also one they literally cannot live without. Number 5. Pine Gap. Pine Gap is located 18 kilometers southwest of Alice Springs in the Northern Territory. It is the most important U.S. intelligence facility outside the continental United States. Approaching it will get you arrested. The facility is officially called the Joint Defence Facility Pine Gap and is jointly operated by the Australian Defence Force, the CIA, the NSA, and the U.S. National Reconnaissance Office. Around 800 to 1,000 personnel work there, roughly half Australian and half American. From the air, it looks like a field of giant white golf balls in the red desert. Those domes are radomes, housing satellite dishes that control at least 4 geosynchronous spy satellites positioned above the Indian Ocean. The satellites monitor an area stretching from the Pacific to Africa. Pine Gap gathers signals intelligence, provides geolocation data for military targeting, including drone strikes, and operates early warning systems for ballistic missile launches. In 1973, the U.S. placed the base on nuclear alert during the Yom Kippur War without informing the Australian Prime Minister. In 2013, Edward Snowden's leaked documents confirmed Pine Gap's role in global mass surveillance. Only 2 people have ever been charged under the Defense Special Undertakings Act 1952 for attempting to enter Pine Gap. Both were protesters. The act carries a sentence of up to 7 years. Almost everything Australians know about what happens inside their own facility comes from foreign whistleblowers. Number 4. Maralinga. Maralinga sits roughly 800 kilometers northwest of Adelaide in the South Australian desert. Between 1956 and 1963, the British government detonated 7 nuclear bombs here and conducted approximately 550 additional component tests known as minor trials. The minor trials were worse than the bombs. The Vixen B tests alone dispersed 22.2 kilograms of plutonium across the landscape. For context, the bomb dropped on Nagasaki contains 6.4 kilograms. Plutonium-239 has a half-life of 24,100 years. The Maralinga Charrucha people, the traditional owners, were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands without explanation. Some were marched through the desert without water. British servicemen were ordered to walk across contaminated ground in the days following the blasts. The British government later admitted this. A royal commission in 1985 condemned the tests and called for cleanup. It took until 2000 for a partial remediation to be completed, at a cost of $100 million. Nuclear engineer Alan Parkinson publicly called the cleanup inadequate and said it would not have been accepted on land belonging to white Australians. In 2009, the land was formally returned to the Maralinga Charrucha, but roughly 120 square kilometers remain classified as accessible for transit only, not for permanent habitation. In 2021, researchers confirmed that radioactive hot particles in the soil are not as stable as previously assumed and may be leaking plutonium into the environment. The government gave the land back, the plutonium stayed. Number 3. North Sentinel Island of Australia, Ashmore Reef. Ashmore Reef sits in the Timor Sea, roughly 840 kilometers west of Darwin and 610 kilometers north of Broome. It is one of Australia's most remote territories. The reef system covers about 583 square kilometers, and the tiny islands that emerge at low tide barely rise above sea level. In 1983, the area was declared a National Nature Reserve. In 2002, the government went further, excising Ashmore from Australia's migration zone. The practical effect was that anyone arriving at Ashmore by boat could no longer apply for an Australian visa on arrival. Navy and Border Force vessels patrolled the reef continuously. Landing without authorization is prohibited. Indonesian fishermen had fished these waters for centuries under a traditional agreement, but access has been progressively restricted. The reef supports over 850 species of fish, 255 species of coral, and is a critical habitat for green and hawksbill turtles, sea snakes, and migratory birds. Despite its extraordinary biodiversity, almost no Australian has seen it. The nearest town with regular flights is Darwin, a 90-minute flight away, and there is no civilian access by sea. Ashmore exists in a legal and geographic gray zone, too far from the mainland to feel like Australia, too strategically important to leave unguarded. Number 2. Uluru Summit. On 26 October 2019, the walking chain that led to the summit of Uluru was permanently removed. Climbing the rock is now illegal. The ban was requested by the Anangu traditional owners for decades before it was finally enacted. To the Anangu, Uluru is a deeply sacred site. Specific parts of the rock are associated with creation stories and ceremonies that are not to be witnessed by outsiders. For years, signs at the base asked visitors not to climb. Most ignored them. On peak days before the ban, over 300 people would summit. In the months leading up to the closure, visitor numbers surged as tourists rushed to climb before the deadline, with some even camping overnight on the rock. Since the ban, the walking track has been dismantled, and the area around the former climb is restricted. Kata Tajuda, the nearby domed rock formation, has also been closed to climbing since 1985. Visitors can still walk around Uluru on designated base walks and view it from multiple lookout points. But the summit itself, the place that appears in a million tourist photographs, is gone. The Anangu spent 34 years asking politely. The government finally listened. The rock is not diminished by the ban. It is more itself than it has been in decades. Number 1. Wittenoom. If you open official government maps of Western Australia and search for Wittenoom, you will not find it. The town has been erased. Road signs removed. Power lines cut. In 2022, the Wittenoom closure bill made it illegal to enter the former town site. In 2023, demolition of the remaining buildings began. Every structure has been flattened and buried. Wittenoom is located in the Pilbara region, about 1,400 kilometers north of Perth, near the edge of Karijini National Park. Between 1943 and 1966, the mine at Wittenoom Gorge produced over 165,000 tons of crocidolite, also known as blue asbestos, the most lethal form of asbestos known. Crocidolite fibers are thinner and sharper than other types and penetrate lung tissue with terrible efficiency. The mining company, Australian Blue Asbestos, a subsidiary of CSR, used asbestos tailings to pave the town's roads, cover its driveways, surface its children's playgrounds, and coat its airport runway. Around 20,000 people lived in or passed through Wittenoom during its operational years. More than 2,000 of them have since died of mesothelioma and other asbestos-related diseases. A single brief visit to the area can be enough. One child who spent only a few months in Wittenoom as a boy was diagnosed with mesothelioma 45 years later. The surrounding area, covering 46,000 hectares, is classified as the largest asbestos-contaminated site in the Southern Hemisphere. Every breath of wind lifts invisible fibers into the air. Despite the ban, urban explorers have continued to enter the area and post photographs online. Health officials have called this behavior reckless. Mesothelioma has no cure. The average survival time from diagnosis is 9 months. Wittenoom was not abandoned. It was not forgotten. It was deliberately erased because the air itself can kill you, and it will keep killing for centuries to come. The fibers do not break down. The wind does not stop. The government removed Wittenoom from every map it controls, and even that was not enough. If you like this video, make sure to comment which of these 20 places you find the most disturbing, and watch this next video.